2,000 years ago, somebody stood in a field in the north of England, surrounded by a fortune, and deliberately destroyed almost all of it. Chariots were smashed apart. A bronze cauldron was flipped upside down and its bottom staved in with a rock. Iron tires, worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, were bent completely out of shape by hand. Then all of it was buried in a ditch, on purpose, never to be dug up again. Nobody knows who did it or why. But in December 2021, a man with a metal detector found it anyway. This is the story of the Melsonby Hoard, one of the most important archaeological discoveries ever made in Britain, and one that archaeologists are still working to fully understand. It isn't a story about gold, or a lost tomb, or a hidden city. It's stranger than that. It's the story of an enormous fortune that somebody chose to destroy, on purpose, in front of witnesses, and then simply walked away from forever. It began, as so many great archaeological finds do, with an amateur. In late December 2021, a metal detectorist named Peter Heads was searching a field near the small village of Melsonby in North Yorkshire when his detector picked up signals that clearly weren't ordinary. Rather than digging everything up himself, Heads did exactly what responsible detectorists are trained to do. He stopped, and he called in the experts. He contacted Professor Tom Moore at Durham University's Department of Archaeology, who quickly realised this was something far bigger than a routine find. Within a short time, a full professional team was involved, bringing together Durham University, the British Museum, and Historic England to carefully and properly excavate the site. What they found, once they started digging, was almost unbelievable in scale. In one trench alone, archaeologists uncovered more than 800 individual pieces of Iron Age metalwork, making it the largest hoard of its kind ever discovered in Britain. A second, smaller hoard nearby contained a similar range of material. Between them, the two hoards included 28 iron tires, torn from the wheels of at least 7 wagons or chariots. They found elaborate harness fittings for more than a dozen horses. They found ceremonial spears. They found an iron mirror and personal jewellery. And they found 2 extraordinary vessels, a large cauldron decorated with images of fish, and a separate ornate bowl, likely used for mixing wine, decorated with pieces of imported coral. This wasn't the leftover clutter of an ordinary farm. This was the property of someone extremely wealthy and extremely powerful. One detail in particular changed how historians think about Iron Age Britain entirely. Among the wreckage, archaeologists identified the first confirmed evidence of 4-wheeled wagons ever found from this period in Britain. Before this discovery, historians largely assumed Britain in this era relied on simpler 2-wheeled chariots, similar to the ones described by Roman writers. 4-wheeled wagons like these were far more associated with continental Europe. Finding them here strongly suggests that the people who buried this hoard weren't isolated at all. They were connected, through trade or diplomacy or both, to networks stretching across Europe, and possibly as far as the Mediterranean world. The location itself adds another layer to the story. The hoard was buried close to Stanwick, a massive Iron Age hill fort widely believed to have been the royal capital of the Brigantes, the most powerful tribal confederation in the north of Britain at the time. Its ruler was a queen named Cartimandua, a name that appears in Roman histories as a shrewd political operator who chose to work with Rome rather than fight it, most famously by handing over a rebel British king who had sought refuge in her territory. Radiocarbon dating places the hoard's burial somewhere between around 40 BC and AD 40, meaning it was buried in the decades immediately before the Roman conquest reached this part of Britain. In other words, this fortune went into the ground during one of the most tense and uncertain periods in early British history, right as the Roman shadow was creeping steadily northward. Now here's the part that turns this from an impressive find into a genuine mystery. Archaeologists quickly noticed that almost nothing in the hoard had simply been lost or hidden away safely for later. It had been deliberately, carefully destroyed first. Those iron tires weren't damaged by accident, they'd been bent completely out of shape by hand. The cauldron hadn't fallen apart with age. It had been turned upside down and had its base smashed in with a large stone. Many other objects showed clear signs of having been burned before burial, not in a chaotic fire, but in a way that experts describe as controlled, almost careful. Whoever did this wasn't hiding treasure to come back for later. They were destroying it on purpose, and then getting rid of the evidence in a ditch covered over with stones. So why would anyone do that? Archaeologists studying the hoard have proposed a couple of serious theories, and the honest answer is that nobody can say for certain which one, if either, is correct. One idea is that this was a spectacular, almost theatrical display of wealth and power. In many ancient cultures, publicly destroying valuable objects was actually a way of proving just how rich and powerful you were, since only someone extraordinarily wealthy could afford to burn a fortune and walk away from it without a second thought. Under this theory, the Melsonby Hoard might have been the Iron Age equivalent of setting fire to a pile of banknotes just to prove you could. The other leading theory connects it to death and funerals. Archaeologists have found evidence in other British sites that valuable objects were sometimes burned on funeral pyres as part of cremation rituals, destroyed alongside the body of someone important as a final, permanent tribute. If that's what happened at Melsonby, this hoard might be everything that remained after a hugely significant funeral for someone whose name and story have been completely lost to time. Either way, one thing is clear. This wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't carelessness. It was a decision made deliberately by someone who had both the wealth and the authority to destroy an absolute fortune and never look back. There's a third, less discussed theory worth mentioning too, one tied directly to the tense political moment this burial happened in. Some archaeologists have suggested the destruction could have marked a political or territorial statement, a deliberate, visible act carried out at a moment when the Brigantian elite around Cartimandua were making difficult decisions about how to deal with an approaching Roman Empire. Destroying a fortune this size, right on the edge of your own territory, could have been a way of marking a boundary, sealing an alliance, or making a public statement of loyalty or defiance at exactly the moment such statements mattered most. It's an appealing theory precisely because of the timing, but like the others, it remains just that, a theory, not a proven fact. To understand just how unusual this find is, it helps to compare it with Britain's other famous ancient hoards. Most people have heard of Sutton Hoo, the Anglo-Saxon ship burial in Suffolk, or the dazzling gold torques found at Snettisham in Norfolk. Both of those are older or later than Melsonby and involve gold jewellery rather than a scrapyard of destroyed vehicles. What makes Melsonby genuinely unique is the sheer scale and specific character of the material. Nowhere else in Britain has anyone found this many Iron Age vehicle parts in one place, deliberately wrecked in a hoard this size. It isn't simply the biggest Iron Age metalwork hoard ever found in the country. It's a completely different kind of object altogether, one that doesn't fit neatly next to anything discovered before it. Once the excavation was finished, the hoard faced a very modern kind of threat. It nearly left Yorkshire, and possibly the country for good. Because it had been legally declared treasure, the hoard needed to be independently valued and then either purchased for a public museum or risk being sold into private hands. Experts valued the Melsonby Hoard at £254,000. The Yorkshire Museum launched an urgent public campaign to save it, and remarkably, they succeeded, raising over £265,000 in total, combining a major grant of just over £192,000 from the National Heritage Memorial Fund with tens of thousands more in public donations and a crowdfunding campaign that ordinary people contributed to directly. In July 2025, the hoard was officially secured for the nation, guaranteeing it would stay in Yorkshire, close to the field where it was buried 2,000 years earlier, permanently available for research and for public display. The project has since gone on to be recognised with a national award, and pieces from the hoard are now being digitally scanned, so members of the public can examine detailed three-dimensional models of objects most people will never get to hold in person. What makes the Melsonby Hoard genuinely remarkable isn't just its size, although 800 objects in a single field is already extraordinary. It's what the hoard refuses to tell us. We know exactly what was buried, we know roughly when, and thanks to careful archaeology, We even know how it was destroyed, piece by piece, on purpose. What we don't know, and quite possibly never will, is who stood in that field 2,000 years ago, what exactly they were mourning, celebrating, or proving, and why they chose that particular patch of Yorkshire earth to bury a fortune that nobody was ever meant to dig up again. A metal detectorist changed that, purely by accident, in the winter of 2021. The rest of the story, the part about who and why, is still sitting somewhere just out of reach, buried as deep in time as the hoard itself once was in the ground.